For other uses of the term contemplation, see contemplation. Theoria is Greek for contemplation. It corresponds to the Latin word contemplatio, looking at, gazing at, being aware of, and it is an important term in theology. Introduction. The Greek theoria, from which the English word theory is derived, meant contemplation, speculation, a looking at things looked at. From theorein, to consider, speculate, look at, from theoris, spectator, from thea, a view, plus horin, to see. It expressed the state of being a spectator. Both Greek theta epsilon omega rho iota alpha and Latin contemplatio primarily meant looking at things, whether with the eyes or with the mind. Taking philosophical and theological traditions into consideration, the term was used by the ancient Greeks to refer to the act of experiencing or observing and then comprehending through consciousness, which is called the nous or eye of the soul, insight into being and becoming through the intuitive truth called faith in God, leads to truth through our contemplative faculties. This theory, or speculation, as action in faith and love for God, is then expressed famously as beauty shall save the world. This expression comes from a mystical or gnoseological perspective, rather than a scientific, philosophical or cultural one. Christianity took up the use of both the Greek and Latin terminology to describe various forms of prayer in the process of coming to know God. Eastern and Western traditions of Christianity grew apart as they incorporated the general notion of theoria into their respective teachings. Several scholars have also demonstrated the similarities between the Greek idea of theoria and the Indian idea of darsana, including Ian Rutherford, Bernard Kumar Agarwala, Gregory Grieve, and Michael A. Di Giovanni. 4th century BC. Athens. For Plato, what the contemplative contemplates are the forms, the realities underlying the individual appearances, and one who contemplates these atemporal and aspatial realities is enriched with a perspective on ordinary things superior to that of ordinary people. Philip of Opus viewed theoria as contemplation of the stars, with practical effects in everyday life similar to those that Plato saw as following from contemplation of the forms. Aristotle, on the other hand, separated the spectating of theoria from practical purposes, and saw it as an end in itself, the highest activity of man, to indicate that it is the philosopher who devotes himself to pursuits most worthy of a free man. Heraclides of Pontus compared him to a spectator at the Olympic spectacle. Unlike the other participants, he does not seek either glory, as does the competitor, or money, as does the businessman. Aristotle used the same image, as we go to the Olympian festival for the sake of the spectacle, even if nothing, or should come of it, for the theoria itself is more precious than money, and just as we go to theorize at the festival of Dionysus not so that we will gain anything from the actors, so too the theoria of the universe must be honored above all things that are considered to be useful. For surely we would not go to such trouble to see men imitating women and slaves, or athletes fighting and running, and not consider it right to theorize without payment the nature and truth of reality. Indeed, Andrea Wilson Nightingale says that Aristotle considers that those who, instead of pursuing theoria for its own sake, would put it to useful ends would be engaging in theoria in the wrong way, and Richard Kraus says that, for Aristotle, theoretical activity alone has limitless value. Thomas Louis Schubeck says that, in Aristotle's view, the knowledge that guides ethical political activity does not belong to theoria. Leading a contemplative life can be considered Aristotle's answer to the question what life humans ought to live. The more humans engage in contemplation, the closer they are to their gods and the more perfect will be their happiness. Aristotle's view that the best life would be a purely contemplative one was disputed by the Stoics and others. such as the Epicureans, who saw speculation as inferior to practical ethics. Middle Platonism and Neoplatonism considered contemplation superior and saw as its goal the knowledge of God or union with Him, so that a contemplative life was a life devoted to God rather than to any kind of activity. Commenting on Aristotle's view of the lack of practical usefulness of the contemplation of Theoria, Andrew Louth said, "The word Theoria is derived from a verb meaning to look or to see. For the Greeks, knowing was a kind of seeing, a sort of intellectual seeing. Contemplation is, then, knowledge of reality itself, as opposed to knowing how, the kind of know-how involved in getting things done." To this contrast between the active life and contemplation there corresponds a distinction in our understanding of what it is to be human between reason conceived as puzzling things out, solving problems, calculating and making decisions, referred to by the Greek words phronesis and dianoia, or in Latin by ratio, and reason conceived as receptive of truth, beholding, looking, referred to by the Greek words theoria or sophia or nous, or in Latin intellectus. Augustine expressed this distinction by using scientia for the kind of knowledge attained by ratio, and sapientia, wisdom, for the kind of knowledge received by intellectus. Human intelligence operates at two levels: a basic level concerned with doing things, and another level concerned with simply beholding, contemplating, knowing reality. Plotinus. In the Enneads of Plotinus, a founder of Neoplatonism, everything is contemplation and everything is derived from contemplation. The first hypostasis, the One, is contemplation in that it turns to itself in the simplest regard, implying no complexity or need. This reflecting back on itself emanated the second hypostasis, intellect. Plotinus describes as living contemplation, being, self-reflective and contemplative activity par excellence. And the third hypostatic level has theoria. Knowledge of the One is achieved through experience of its power, an experience that is contemplation of the source of all things. Plotinus agreed with Aristotle's systematic distinction between contemplation and practice. Dedication to the superior life of theoria requires abstention from practical, active life. Plotinus explained, the point of action is contemplation. Contemplation is therefore the end of action, and such is the life of the divinity and of divine and blessed men. Detachments from all things here below, scorn of all earthly pleasures, the flight of the lone to the alone. Modern philosophy. In modern times theoria is sometimes treated as distinct from the meaning given to it in Christianity, linking the word not with contemplation but with speculation. Boethius translated the Greek word theoria into Latin, not as contemplatio but as speculatio, and theoria is taken to mean speculative philosophy. A distinction is made, more radical than in ancient philosophy, between theoria and praxis, theory and practice. Christianity. Some Neoplatonic ideas were adopted by Christianity, among them the idea of contemplation, taken over by Gregory of Nyssa for example. The Brill Dictionary of Gregory of Nyssa remarks that contemplation in Gregory is described as a loving contemplation, and, according to Thomas Keating, the Greek Fathers of the Church, in taking over from the Neoplatonists the word theoria, attached to it the idea expressed by the Hebrew word daath, which, though usually translated as knowledge, is a much stronger term, since it indicates the experiential knowledge that comes with love and that involves the whole person, not merely the mind. In addition, the Christians' theoria is not contemplation of Platonic ideas nor of the astronomical heavens of Pontic Heraclitus, but is contemplative prayer, the knowledge of God that is impregnated with love, together with the meaning of proceeding through philosophical study of creatures to knowledge of God. Theta epsilon omega rho iota alpha had, among the Greek Fathers, another important meaning, namely, studying the scriptures, with an emphasis on the spiritual sense. Later, contemplation came to be distinguished from intellectual life, leading to the identification of theta epsilon omega rho iota alpha or contemplatio with a form of prayer distinguished from discursive meditation in both East and West. Some make a further distinction, within contemplation, between contemplation acquired by human effort and infused contemplation, an exercise long used among Christians for acquiring contemplation, one that is available to everyone, whether he be of the clergy or of any secular occupation, is that of focusing the mind by constant repetition of phrase or word. St. John Cassian recommended use of the phrase, "O God, make speed to save me. O Lord, make haste to help me." Another formula for repetition is the name of Jesus, or the Jesus Prayer, which has been called the mantra of the Orthodox Church. Although the term Jesus Prayer is not found in the Fathers of the Church, the author of The Cloud of Unknowing recommended use of a monosyllabic word, such as God or love. This exercise, which, for the early Fathers, was just a training for repose, the later Byzantines developed into a spiritual work of its own, attaching to it technical requirements and various stipulations that became a matter of serious theological controversy, and are still of great interest to Byzantine, Russian and other Eastern churches.